Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 22 of the Nurtured by Nature podcast. Today, I am delighted to be joined in conversation by the amazing Polly Hearsey. Polly is a business mentor with a master's degree in environmental science and a background in nature conservation. Together, we embark on a fascinating and inspiring conversation, delving into the empowering concept that governmental policy doesn't change culture, but rather it is culture that ultimately dictates policy. We reflect on the phase shift for humanity that is needed and how by learning to actively listen to nature and engage her principles for ecosystem health, we can shape businesses capable of offering a way to heal our greatest collective wound. Polly's vision, utilising a move away from the societal predisposition towards linear thinking to an understanding of the interconnected complex web that creates conditions to thrive, sees rewilded businesses incorporate ideas for diversity and collaboration over competition, allowing them to be actively engaged in nature and their communities with their environmental and social responsibilities ingrained at every level as a functional part of their core DNA. Well, welcome, Polly. It's really lovely to have you joining us on this episode of the Nurtured by Nature podcast. I'm quite excited to talk with you today and learn a bit more about what you do and some of the wisdom you're going to be sharing with us all. I just tend to get started my conversations with my guests by asking them to share a little bit about their nature story and really whatever that means to you, how nature has been a part of your life and if your connection with nature has changed and evolved over time. So if there's anything that you would like to share about nature and how it's been part of your life, that would be lovely.
Well, it's an interesting one because I don't think of myself as somebody who sort of like has these moments where I might have moments where I just go, oh yeah, okay, but things unravel. I mean, I think they do for us all. But so I was kind of reflecting a little bit about where did I sort of learn to appreciate nature and how did I learn to appreciate nature? And actually, it came to me last week because I realized that something that has always been part of my life, as I actually lost last week, which is that my pony, I had to have her put down last week.
Oh, I'm so
So
sorry to hear that.
was that, yeah,
Yeah.
but the thing that really, beyond the sadness of it, that hit me is that I have always had that need to be outside.
Yeah.
I've been outside in all weathers. It doesn't matter, if it's 3 foot of snow, I still had to go.
Yeah.
And so my whole life I have been around the elements and nature every single day, and it's really, really strange now to over this last week to not have that need to go outside.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was also sort of reflecting on, well, actually, yeah, that's how I get next to nature. Because the thing about when you're around horses, nature's not scared of horses; they're scared of people. So I've had some of the most amazing experiences in my life. I remember sort of like pootling along the road, and all of a sudden, this brown ball rolled out of the hedgerow. And there were two stoats or weasels. They didn't stay still long enough to work that one out.
Yeah.
And they were bumbling along the road in a territorial fight, and they didn't give two hoots that I was there because I was on a horse.
Yeah.
And I followed them for about 200 yards, going
Oh,
in and out of the hedge. And on another occasion, I was like trotting along the road, and all of a sudden, I had this barn owl next to me. And I trotted next to this barn owl for about a quarter of a mile as it swooped along the field. And it's just like, yeah. So, I guess that's where nature has always been a part of my interpretation of life, if you like. It's what I've always seen about, what's important in life. But yeah, my connection has changed considerably over the years. It's been something that I did my degree, and then I got to the end of my degree and just suddenly went, and there was all sorts of things kicking off, and I just suddenly went, I need to go off and do something environmental. So I kind of went off and did something environmental. I did a master's in environmental management. Then I ended up working with a conservation charity.
Okay.
And then that's gone. Then I sort of changed jobs, and then I eventually became, started working with myself. And the thing that was really difficult was that this incredibly important part of myself that wasn't part of my business. So
Okay.
there I was doing marketing and doing business development and all this. And there was just like, there was this other piece of me that I was trying to find a way to bring in. And really, over the last few years, my relationship with nature has shifted, because now, instead of watching it and observing it and appreciating it, I've moved into listening to it.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Does that
Quite a big
kind of
shift.
make sense?
Yeah. 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 No,
Yes. So,
it's
so it's like listening to well, what's it saying? What does it want? What does it need? And it dawned on me this year. I do a lot of work in the community with um, biodiversity protection. So, whether that's sort of like keeping our verges sort of like uncut and
yeah.
unscathed and stuff. Um, and one of the things that frustrates me hugely around here, because it's a very rural area, is when people drive all over the verges.
Yeah,
And
I'm also in a rural village, and yes, it's surprising, isn't it? They
mm,
erode it quite dramatically over the years.
hugely. I mean, we've got one verge that I look after, and we've lost 2 foot of it in it the
Oh
last
wow.
2 years because
Wow.
big tractors getting on it. And I realized was actually how physically I feel that loss.
Yeah.
It's not just, oh, that's such a shame. I feel it. It
Yeah.
actually hurts when I see someone chopping down a tree that should have been allowed to be there, or somebody's
Yeah.
chewing up the land or polluting it or dumping stuff, I
Yeah.
really, so I think that's one of the things about learning to listen to the land, is that, like, I just feel how disrespectful it is and how invisible it's become to people.
Yeah, I think you're right. Culturally, I mean, obviously, the listeners of this podcast probably um maybe they don't feel that because it's not to them, but I think culturally as a whole, you're right. We nature is invisible. Probably at best, sometimes it's even worse than that. It's just seen as a problem, isn't it? And inconvenience, laws to protect nature. I mean, there's a lot of talk about that at the moment, isn't it? Of how the laws are just,
Yeah.
making it difficult for progress. We love that
Yeah.
word, don't we?
Yeah, we
And
do.
it is, but it is sad that culturally we've just become so disconnected from it, haven't we? Removed from it. Our lives are not entwined with it anymore, and
I
it's
mean, that's the
finding our
thing,
way
isn't it?
back, isn't it?
Yeah, when it becomes a nuisance, you're not actually saying that we depend on it. So to say that we deserve to have more space for businesses or houses or whatever at the expense of nature, I really struggle to wrap my head around that, because if we don't have nature, we don't have anything to have a business with.
Well, and it's at
That's,
our own expense as well, isn't it? I
yeah,
think that's
absolutely.
the thing, is it impacts our, there's lots of studies about mental health,
Oh yeah,
as well as obviously health, wellness, and air quality. The trees help
yeah,
with that hugely, don't they? So I think it is very short-sighted, isn't it? And I think obviously as a society, that's particularly what we've become, haven't we? Quite sort of um in rewards driven, like, we want immediate, um
yeah,
yeah, rather than this sort of longer term, which time that nature, that sort of nature timeline, isn't it, of which
yeah.
is completely different to our general. And in business, I guess that's part of what your business is about, isn't it? Is basically tuning in more to that sort of rhythm of nature and how we
Th-
can learn
yeah.
from that.
There's so much toxic thinking in business. I mean, it's extraordinary. It's like, we have to have results now. We have to have, you have to always be growing. You have to always be doing. And there is just this plethora of, this is how you do it. Here's 7 steps. I can guarantee you're going to get results. And the thing is, there is no single solution in nature. Not to get too controversial and too sidetracked, but if you take something like electric cars, which are being pushed as a universal global solution.
Yeah.
Now, if there's one thing that nature tells us, it's that when you have a dominance of anything, you get system collapse.
Yeah.
And so we need to have multiple solutions. And those solutions have to be born of place. And when I say born of place, that's about the person who's bringing them forward, where they are, what their life has given them, and the place that they find themselves in, because that's how you create a unique solution. And in unique solutions, you create diversity, and in diversity, you create resilience and strength.
Yeah.
That's what an ecosystem is. It is not a linear thing. It is this complex web. And we've got so linear in our thinking that we look at something and we don't see the interconnections. So if you look at all the research that's being done about so just going, wow, trees communicate. It's like, well, if we'd ever it's like remembering something that people could have told you a very long time ago.
Yeah.
But if you actually stop and listen, you realize that the oak tree is supporting an entire ecosystem. There is actually, just down the road from me, there is this amazing old oak tree, and you look up into her branches and there is a visible ecosystem in her branches. She's got ferns growing out of her, moss covering. It's just, that there is an entire world
Yeah, I
that's
think,
living there.
I mean, there's research on it, isn't there? And it's staggering. It's like over 2,000 different species are dependent on our ancient oak trees, and I mean, that's quite incredible. If you thought of that in terms of people, and you brought like 2,000 people together, and they were all dependent on one person, you'd think that person had something quite special. But we just don't seem to be able to kind of put that association with nature, do we seem to have, we have such a disconnect that we just can't like value these amazing beings, really, because that's what they are, aren't they? And see the wealth of what they offer and what they give to us. And
I've been doing a lot of thinking about what we see and what we don't see recently, in terms of, we're an apex species, and and the whole point of life is to become this apex species, the apex of the apex, if you like. That's what our cultures push us towards. It's like to be in the elite. The problem is that it depends upon everything that's underneath it, and there are multiple layers underneath it. And what we do is we harvest, we scrape, we take all of everything out of the middle, and we are completely unaware of the importance of the most important things to life. So we don't think, we're not protecting plankton, we're not protecting soil bacteria, when the things that are invisible to us and seem to be sort of like mucky or whatever, or I don't know what the thinking is, but
invisible, it's just
they are
invisible.
invisible.
That's the thing, isn't it? Like what you're saying there is, I mean, they're the really invisible parts of the sort of visible spectrum of nature, aren't they? The tiny microscopic organisms that we've just, I mean, part of it is, I guess, science developing to a stage that we've now got the kind of technology to really study them, but also just disregarding them and just not seeing them at all, and so therefore not giving them any importance in what they contribute to the ecosystem as a whole. And it is, you're right, the invisible, and that comes back to, again, doesn't it, that visibility of nature to people.
It is extraordinary, because of course we're recording this the week after the sycamore was felled on Hadrian's Wall.
Yeah.
And it's extraordinary, isn't it, that you can have such this visceral sadness in a community because of a single tree. And granted, it was pretty much the only tree in that landscape.
Yeah.
So it is going to be very prominent. And yet not to have that for other things. Is it because it's a landscape feature? I was just,
I think
it's
I've been
horrendously sad, but
I've been sort of grappling with that a little bit this week as well, trying to work out like why that one particular tree. And I was thinking maybe it's just that tree has come at a point that it's brought to a climax, like a lot of feeling that's been sort of rippling through society. We've had a lot in the UK, haven't we, of frustrations around government or organizations not delivering. And I think maybe part of it is it was a very like visible kind of act of like representing like this whole greater sort of feeling and emotion. And
Mm.
I think it was one of those cases of almost like the straw that broke the camel's back kind of thing, and that was the straw that everyone focused on. But actually I think the immediate kind of upwelling of emotion seems much deeper rooted, and I think it's just been sort of building and building, and that was the bit that it sort of just poured out through. And
Yes, it's
whether
such a
yeah,
random, pointless destruction. It's and which is typical that we see. I get a lot of emails from the all of the petition platforms,
yeah,
and one of the things in there is the extraordinary cruelty to animals.
yeah,
You just go, where does this mentality come from? And that, to me, is a representation of how disconnected we are, how fundamentally disconnected we are of, you know, and increasingly so when we're behind computer screens all day.
yeah,
But our education system isn't really supporting people to understand that the natural world, or feel comfortable in it, to feel safe in it. You know, the people, I remember a story from a few years ago, somebody saying that they used to have an annual pony club camp, and there was a pond 2 fields away. And when they first started doing it, the first day the kids would be down at the pond playing around, and over the years they got closer and closer to they didn't find the pond, they didn't go beyond the field, until now they just don't go beyond the field that they're in. And that's, to me, is a really sad reflection of how little we feel collectively, how little safety we feel in
yeah,
exploring the environment, and it's how dangerous it is. You know, people will see grass snake and freak out because they don't know that it's
yeah,
not dangerous. And of
yeah,
course we get this exposure to information from other countries where, of course, you would run in the other direction fast. But you know, with that lack of connection and respect for the environment, makes it invisible. And when it's invisible, nobody sees the loss. We don't see how it's degrading over time. And I find that so hard,
yeah,
because I live in this mountain, you know, right on the edge of the mountains. On the face of it, it's this incredibly beautiful landscape. And people who've moved, and we've got a lot of people who've moved into this area, and they go, "Oh, but it's so beautiful." I said, "Yes, but look at it. Look at it. You tell me where you can see the juvenile oak that is going to replace the mature oaks,
yeah,
because there is not one, not a single. I mean, there's
yeah,
just one that I planted a few years back.
yeah,
That's it. And I keep my fingers crossed it doesn't get flailed.
yeah,
Um, but it's not. And the hedges are all going to rack and ruin because they're not fenced off, and the sheep are eating them all. And you actually look at it, and the it's overgrazed in a lot of places, or it's not alive in the way that it could be. But
yeah.
then the type of mosaic of habitats that we need for the environment to be really healthy are perceived as problems, like the scrub. And so that's one of the things I got a lot out of from reading Isabella Tree's book on the Knepp estate.
Yeah.
Because when I look at the photos of the Knepp estate, where it's got all these patches of scrub, it speaks to me in a way that it it's like it's come down through my ancestry, and I recognize it. I look at it and I just go, that's what it should look like. There's this, it's not these square fields, it's not these boxed out hedges. There are just this mosaic of things going on. And it's in that that we then get the opportunities to explore. And when we explore, we understand, and then we find our connection again. And I
And
think that's something we don't have the opportunity
yeah,
to do much.
I mean, I've actually been lucky enough to spend some time at the Knepp estate, and I've met Charlie and Isabella. I did a biological recording course there and things
Oh,
with their ecologist Penny, and it is and that was quite a few years ago now, I think 2016 2017 time. So I mean, even now it's there's been a big change even since then. And it is just this, we have this, I think it's sort of from the industrialization and Victorian era, this desire for neat and tidy, don't we? And
mm,
we see nature as messy, and we don't, when we see it when it ceases to be invisible, it's normally because it's become a problem for us. And and that's, and we've lost this whole understanding of the value of things like that. Like you said, the scrub actually protects the young trees, the little saplings. It protects them from being grazed upon by wildlife. And so if you constantly remove all the scrub, you lose your tree nurseries, basically, because that's what they
mm,
are, aren't they? Those little pockets. And
they are.
um
Yeah, I worked
yeah.
for obviously having worked for a conservation organization. One of the things the volunteer groups were sent out to do was scrub bashing, which, benefit of hindsight, you just go, possibly not the best of things. But it's the problem we've got, I think, is that we have to roll back the tide on a lot of our protected spaces because we don't have a network. If they were all joined up, we would be able to allow them to do their own thing, but we can't. We have to manage them quite intensively in order to keep the spaces available for those habitats and those plants, those animals that are so threatened, which means that we can't actually have a progressive approach to conservation and nature in this country because
Well,
we're scrabbling to protect it.
one of the keys of things like NEP and rewilding is obviously the use of the animals, isn't it, who would naturally manage certain areas. So it's trying to find that balance of us basically doing that job, because particularly in this country where we lack a lot of the sort of historic wild larger megafauna that should be here.
Yeah.
So it's trying to find that way to balance it, but not overstep. And I
Mm.
think it is a difficult balance to make, but I think there are, there's more and more people, aren't there, who are starting to embrace this kind of concept of rewilding, making space a bit more as a regenerative farming. It is slowly trickling through in places, and there is starting to see people like yourself who are starting to listen to nature and partake in nature rather than just viewing it and being separate to it.
And I do think there's this real need to allow nature to talk. So what I mean by that is that quite often we end up trying to control what it's doing. So when I read a lot of posts in wildlife gardening, it's, shall I pull this out? Shall I pull that out? Should I do that? You just think, well, why don't you just leave it and see what happens? And we've got a front garden is quite small, but we turned it into a meadow 16 years ago, and I've watched everything move. We planted it where we planted it, but I've watched everything move to where it wants to be. It's sort of gradually moved, and that's the non-interference approach. And that's something that is part and parcel of the psychology of the connection with nature, because we want to control it and we want to understand what's going to happen. But part of the beauty of listening to nature is allowing it to do its own thing. And that, to me, is like my starting point for thinking about business. It's like, when you listen to your business, what does it actually want to do? Because it is, to me, every business is an expression of nature. If we're nature, so is our business. So why is it following these prescribed, regimented, limiting approaches when it could be finding what comes next? Because we do need a what comes next. We can't carry business as usual is going to destroy everything that it depends upon. So we do need a new approach. What's that going to look like? And that's where we need the floodgates to open for lots of people to think about things in different ways.
Yeah, and I think particularly small businesses, I mean, I don't know the scale of business that you work with, but sort of the small to medium enterprises seem probably more keen to immediately adapt some of these principles and more able to, I think, because they have less people perhaps to work with, less constraints on themselves. But I think a lot of people have been waiting for sort of the governments and are starting to get to the point where they realize that that's not where the answer comes from, and
Mm.
actually it's going to come from this sort of grassroots movement, and businesses are uniquely placed to play a huge part in that. And I think that's where your role is quite special, isn't it? And that you're basically
Yeah.
helping.
See, policy doesn't change culture. People, when you impose a policy on people, they kick back against it.
Yeah.
Culture actually directs policy. So we have to change the culture. And when you said that, some of the bigger businesses are less able to, it's not so much that they're less able to because they've got more people. It's they're less able to because they're so tied into the existing model. Whereas the smaller businesses are very capable of adapting, shifting, creating new ideas, and not all of them will survive. And that's part of the pioneer species. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
If you think about pioneer species, they are there to prepare the ground. That's what they do. The birch moves it in to make it possible for it to become a woodland. That's its job. And that's what a lot of the businesses that are coming through need to be, and some of them will survive and some of them won't. It depends on how adaptable they are and how they understand their ability to evolve. But so the smaller businesses are the ones who can be the most innovative, and they can shape a different culture. And I think the most important thing around business is that we change the expectations. And some of that's about the narrative of what does it mean to be successful? Because right now, we measure it in one way and one way alone, and that is productivity and the economic benefit, the return.
Yep.
And that doesn't take into account, well, it entirely depends on stripping the earth of its natural resources. That's
Yep.
the correlation. So I want to see businesses that are part of the ecosystem. So rather than business ecosystems, I want to see ecosystem businesses. I want to see ones that are not just mitigating, I hate the word, mitigating their impact, reducing their impact. I want to see them be an active part of the ecosystem. I have no idea what that's going to look like because every business is going to be different. But that should be a principle to me that people are pursuing, so that it's shifting the entire narrative of business into a place where we engage nature, we engage community and social responsibility as much as we engage our need to generate economic returns, because ultimately, I suspect in not too distant future, that concept of economic return is going to look extremely different. And we're going to have a different way of considering performance or considering how we structure our societies. At the moment, it's entirely built on our economic model. The capitalist model defines all of our cultures at the moment. So we have to, so for me, the lodge, even though I'd be quite happy to go out and garden for the rest of my life or whatever, and get some land and do some rewilding on it, I would be very happy for myself. Changing business is our route into changing our cultures and our connection to the nature, because that's the path through which we've lost it.
Yeah.
That's my view anyway.
And I think it's important to, we can't just burn down everything that we've got now. We need to have a bridge from where we are to where we want to go. And I think what you're talking about is a way to provide that bridge, to say, well, we've still got this business model that that predominates in society, where we value economics above all else, but we can work within some of that framework, and we can start to change that narrative. We can move the needle of what we're trying to achieve, but working in a way that's familiar to people, so that it's easier for them to adapt and integrate it and move towards it. And then, like, we don't know exactly what direction, how the bridge will look and how it will flow, but we know where we're trying to go. But it allows more people to come along for the journey, I think, when it starts in a way that does have some familiarity for them, so that they can, it's not so much of a change, is it? And it's so, because I think too big a change is too much of a shock.
Yeah.
and then people don't do it. And
Absolutely. Well, it's
yeah,
terrifying. There's an amazing interview on YouTube with Daniel Schmachtenberger, and I think it's called Phase Shift for Humanity, and it's an incredibly good interview. But what he talks about is how when there's change coming, the thing is we don't know what it's going to look like because we ain't there yet. So, and that's the problem. We think, well, I don't have the answers, so we can't make a move. And that um, paradox is the thing that I'm working on, is like, how do we, as you say, how do we create that bridge? How do we start the process of movement and remain open to what's on the other side of taking any step? Because the minute you've taken the step, you've changed the entire field.
yeah,
And therefore a whole load of new things come up. And that's why diversity of, and collaboration and conversation is so important, because no one person can have the answer.
yeah.
It's in conversation that something sparks something in someone else, and then that sparks something else in you, and between you make far more progress than you ever will on your own, because you
Yeah,
haven't got that diversity of perspective.
I think that's really important. Is I was talking to another guest a little while ago, and we were talking very much about how, there's certainly been almost a little bit too much reliance on science having all of the answers, and actually part of it is, how you interpret that science. And as creatives, we sometimes have an ability to view things in a very different way to scientists, and we can take like what they're seeing and say, oh well, hang on, maybe you should try this because we think a little bit differently. But equally they can also come along and go measure the impacts for us as well. So it's a question, like you say, of this. There is just, I mean, one thing that always seems to come up in all my conversations is this idea of community and collaboration, and that we just need to, I think, be more open. And I think that's what your conversation and wisdom from nature is about as well, isn't it? Is just,
Yeah,
this idea of there is wisdom out there, and sometimes it's from other people, but sometimes it is from like the land and the elements
yeah,
and the seasons. And it's just being open to the fact that we need different ways of doing things. We might not even have the answers, but we just need to have the openness to look for
mm,
those answers and ways.
yeah. Well, I'm not surprised that collaboration comes up, because that is a natural principle. It's the natural principle. It's the entire natural order is based on collaboration, and we've got this idea. I think Darwin may have had a little to do with that, of the survival of the fittest, and it's all competitive, but it's not. It's very much interactive, and everybody knows that. Every part knows that it's dependent on everything else. And I think one of the things, when I was doing my master's in environmental management, one of the things that we did a module on environmental economics, and we talked about the tragedy of the commons, and that is a concept I come back to time and time and time again, is that we are in the tragedy of the commons, where we're so afraid that someone else is going to have what we could have, that we just strip it all out. And that doesn't happen in nature, that we can't have dominance of one thing in nature. Otherwise, you get a system collapse. And when you get a system collapse, then you get a new systems that comes into place. So there is a constant evolution in that. But yes, it's a big shift that we need to be making in our thinking. Not an easy one to make. I don't think any of us think that this is necessarily going to be an easy
Well,
process.
I think maybe that's another problem that we struggle with in society, isn't it? Is that we have been kind of um a little bit indoctrinated into this idea that something has to be easy, otherwise that you don't do it, almost, don't you? It's
Mm,
like, take the path of least resistance kind of idea. And I
mm,
think I mean, we're talking about big changes, aren't we? And that isn't going to be easy. It's not necessarily that there's going to be resistance either, but it's not straightforward, because like you say, it's the pioneer species. They've got to come into this sort of bare ground and make it habitable for everyone else.
mm. Yes, there's one thing we know. It is the governments aren't going to innovate their way through this. It's just not possible. That it's not within their repertoire. They don't understand what it takes. They haven't got the flexibility either to do that. So it's going to come from the ground up. It has to come from the ground up. There's a wonderful video on from Martha Beck on called The Pyramid and the Pool, which is one I come back to. If you haven't seen it, it's a pyramid of sugar cubes, and she explains social change by pouring a jug of water into the bottom that the pyramid is sitting into, and of course it dissolves from the bottom down. So structure changes from the bottom down, and transformation and innovation comes from the bottom. So actually that's where the real power is right now. And
Yeah.
of course, what's underneath us, if we see the human pyramid, what's underneath us is nature, and nature actually has way more power than we like to give it credit for. And is kind of really pretty tolerant with us. But what I love is how resilient it is, and if you give it an inch, it'll take a mile.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we need to do, is just be saying, it's an invitation to nature. Whether we want to listen, or whether we want to do something, or we want to do restoration, or whatever it is, it's an invitation to say, I'm open to communication, and I'm open to seeing what you can create, because in that we there's so much learning for us. And certainly on a business front, that simple opportunity to sit in conversation with nature and say, well, how do I do this? How do I honor what I feel to be the right path when none of the tools that I have in front of me are fit for the job, and they're not fit for purpose. So I mean, I don't know a single business tool that is fit for purpose for anybody who has got a conscious approach. They want to see something very different. They want to feel comfortable. They don't want to feel that they're pushing people into making decisions. They don't want to be operating in ways that is actually very harmful to them and to the people that they're working with and to the environment. So they need new tools. And nature is the best teacher we have possibly got. You just sit and talk to nature and ask, or just observe and see how nature does it. I'm not. I think probably about 5 or 6 years ago, I thought, oh, biomimicry, that's a really fascinating pathway. And interestingly enough, I've never pursued it, because I think it's not right to mimic nature. We have to find how to be part of nature.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
instead of mimicking those systems, we need to think about, how do I operate as part of this
Yeah,
system?
become
How do I live?
part of it. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think you're spot on when you there's some amazing books being written from the perspective of a lot of the indigenous cultures around the world, and
Mm.
one of the key threads of theirs is always the that we were part of the cycle. We weren't separate to it. We didn't just observe it. We had an important role to play.
Yeah,
And I think what you're saying there is completely aligned with that, isn't it? It's just that we need to put ourselves back into the cycle, and but in a positive way. I mean, instead
yeah.
of how we have been behaving in such a destructive, negative fashion.
But we have to learn to listen in order to do that. It's not possible. That's the one thing that you get from all of the books and the indigenous knowledge, is that you can't just plow in there and take action. You have to listen to understand how to act. And it can be very subtle and very nuanced. And we just don't have that um, awareness of what's going on. And we coming back to the concept of invisibility. If you walk down a country lane in this country, and you walk down that lane in April, and then you walk down that lane again in July, you would be forgiven for thinking that the exact same flowers were out, because it looks like the dandelions are still out. It looks like the cow parsley is still out. we have to look much closer, because when you look that much closer, you realize, oh, those aren't dandelions, and that's not cow parsley.
Yeah.
We have a lot of different plants that look very similar if you don't look closely. But
Yeah.
once you look closely, you can't but not see that they're different. And I mean, that's a huge educational piece there that has to happen. But how that's yeah, a stick to my bit.
Yeah.
Really. And I mean, I have been doing that in terms of sort of like community communication about, oh look, this is this flower and that's that flower. And in fact, the community newsletter, you said, wouldn't it be amazing if we put something tear off strip at the bottom of everything that said, here's what to go out and look for this month. And I think that sort of enthusiasm is amazing, because most people say, I just don't, I can't, I can't see what's going on in here. It's just long grass or whatever. They can't see the different bits, and it doesn't take much to learn, but it does take a willingness to look
Yeah.
and be open to it. So I think there's so many things that we need to address, and if each of us is addressing those things in our own way and from our own perspective, then we've got the whole covered, really. And that's which is why we come back to collaboration.
Yeah.
Collaboration's so important.
Yeah, I am. Sorry, it just started raining quite heavily here.
Mm.
Like, what was that? A strange noise. I was like, oh goodness, what's that? But yeah, it does come back to collaboration, and it comes back to, I think you've said the word a couple of times, and it's something that part of the reason I started the podcast is that people quite often feel powerless, and
Mm.
they feel like they can't do anything, and they're desperate to do something to help and to see change, and but they feel like nothing that they can do is going to make a difference, and then often they feel a bit overwhelmed by that, so they don't do as much as they perhaps could. And I think I loved your analogy there of the sugar cubes, and I hope my listeners will have listened to that, and they remember that they're one of the little sugar cubes at the bottom, and actually they can help bring the whole pyramid down. Really, it's like
Yeah,
in a nice way. It's like
yeah.
they have this amazing role to play, and it might feel small, but the smallest of actions can actually make
Mm.
a big difference.
Yeah, I absolutely. It's about action. So we've kind of got into this mentality, I think, where you've got to shout loudly and be heard and kick up a stink about things in order to change it from the top. But actually, the actions change it from the bottom. And every action that you take and you stick by, and you defend that action, and you say why it's important. If you say it to yourself first, and then you say it to your immediate circle, then it ripples out. And the speed at which that ripples out, you couldn't orchestrate that any other way at that speed. It's not possible. So you have immense power to make those changes, and just the willingness to be open to doing things in a different way, the willingness to question, why has it always been done that way? Why am I doing it why am I doing it that way? All of those things allow you to just live a more conscious life. And the more conscious you are about how you live it, then the more conscious you are of its impact on everything else around you. And then it's a snowball effect. So there really is huge amount of power involved for everybody who feels powerless.
Yeah, I think that's it's a lesson that we all need to hang on to, don't we? Especially in our times of like despair, like a lot of people have felt over the sycamore tree this week.
Yeah.
And I think it is just remembering that like we aren't powerless, and we do have the power to just do little things. And like you said, those ripples, sometimes we don't even know how far those ripples reach, and we might never know. And that's the beauty of it as well, isn't it? It's
Mm.
the amazing power of what one individual can do, and the differences they can make. But I know in your business you also talk quite a lot about seasons, and you did touch on it a little bit earlier about the fact that as a society, I think we're sort of perpetually stuck in one season, really, aren't we?
Oh
And
God, yes.
um,
Yeah.
yeah, so I don't know if you just want to sort of touch a little bit on um, how the seasons have impacted how you sort of help businesses, how you, even in your own life, I guess they probably impact you.
Well, yeah, they I mean, they do. We all feel different in every season. But the main thing is understanding the cycle, because the seasons present a cycle. And so we are in this cultural space of constant productivity, which doesn't value integration and consolidation. So every time you go through a period of personal growth, or the growth in your business, or you've learnt a new skill, or whatever it is, you need to actually consolidate that. And there is a period of quiet that comes. And we're about to descend into that in the UK now, and in the Northern Hemisphere as we go into autumn. We're moving into a quieter phase, and that's a phase of integration. And in my membership, which is based on rewilding businesses, we're going to be working on creating the structures that actually hold all this sort of like new ideas and this new momentum that people have been getting over the summer. It's like, well, you need some way of holding it. You need to integrate it. You need to be able to work with it and take it forward. Because what happens mostly, and I learned this through working with the elements, as you know, sort of like as conceptual rather than physical, is that if you don't do this work, then all of that inspiration and all of that energy just evaporates. It needs to be held somehow. And that's what we're going into seasonally now, is this period of where we actually say, right, I'm going to keep that energy safe. I'm going to work out, what it's becoming, because, in the elemental cycle, we're talking about putting seeds into the earth and waiting for them to blossom. So the seasonal cycle takes us all the way sort of like through that quieter time, and we need to make space for that quieter time. And that might not come just at this time of the year. It comes actually all the time when you're in business, or when you're in life. We're doing anything creative, it comes all the time, because you can move through a creative cycle in 10 minutes, or you can move through a creative cycle in 10 years. It's just different phases of it. But we need to learn to appreciate that quieter time, instead of this constant upward trajectory of results
Yeah.
that is expected of us at every corner. And that's really what I've learned about seasonal approach, is learning how the seasons actually physically affect us and how we feel in each season, because everybody's different, but also learning to pay attention to what's happening in nature through the seasons, and what changes are happening, and why, and what we can really learn from that when we're listening to it.
We do just have this tendency, don't we, of I was thinking when you were talking about that, I was thinking about how we view procrastination as well, actually, and it's got such a negative connotation, hasn't it, of this, well, you've got to be doing, haven't you? That's our society. It's got to be busy doing all the time. And if you're not, then you're a bit lazy and you're procrastinating on something and just avoiding it. And
Yeah. Sometimes procrastination is not procrastination, it is your intuition saying, hold up. And I get that quite often. I think, why can't I make progress on this? And then, out of the blue, I'll just suddenly, poof, it'll go. You'd get it all done, but spend months just going, why is that still on my list? It's driving me nuts. But you're not ready to move forward with it, and that's because something else needs to drop into place first.
I think you talked about your pony earlier. I've got my own horses, and I've spent time with like natural horsemanship trainers, and sometimes you'll be trying to sort of train a skill or work with a skill, and you'll get a bit stuck, and just you're sort of trying to do it and you can't do it. And actually one of the biggest skills is just to walk away from it, and sometimes you'll just put it down and you might not touch it again for it could be a week or two, couple of weeks, even a month or more, and
Yeah,
then you come back to it with your horse and your horse goes, oh, I'm
I
still on it
remember.
now. And then you just do it perfectly,
Yeah,
right?
I remember that one. I was teaching said pony to walk sideways down the side of a building, and she, oh my God, she jackknife for ages, and then out of the blue, she just suddenly got it one day,
Yeah.
or I got it. Who
Yeah.
knows?
Yeah. Well, that's it, isn't it? It's like whether you ask the question the right way or whether they had the finally had the right answer. It's probably a bit of both, but it's just the,
Yeah.
there's a whole idea that actually sometimes the not doing can provide more of an answer than the doing. And
Mm,
it's the things that are going on in the background, which I guess again comes back to your seasonal cycles. You've
mm.
planted the seeds, and actually, over winter you don't really have to do much with them. You just have to, obviously make sure maybe something doesn't come and dig them up and eat them, but they just sort of look after themselves in their quiet time, and they're busy, germinating.
Yeah, I
And
mean, if you think about it, I mean, seed is like this concentrated energy source. But it needs a lot of things from the earth in order to, it needs the structure, it needs water, it needs warmth, and all these things. It needs all of that in order to be able to germinate. And I think people are so scared of doing nothing in business, and I understand that. But actually, sometimes it's just about taking a step back and saying, what do I need? How do I want to resource this? What are the soil and the water and the warmth that I need in order to progress this idea? Because we need to connect to ourselves. We just need that space to say, what do I need right now? God, we just don't create that in society. I find it so soul destroying sometimes when you look at education and how it's just our young children that just don't get that space.
well, we're never asked to ask ourselves what we need, are we? We're
No.
told what we need. I think that's the whole thing with, healthcare, education, everything. The whole
Yeah.
time it's someone else outside of you saying, "Oh, do this. This is what you need." And
Yeah.
there is very little space made for you to sit and say, well, actually, doing that doesn't feel good to me. Maybe
Mm,
it works for 90% of people, but actually for me it doesn't feel good. It makes me feel worse. Or
yeah.
and in business as well, people, like you said, people are individuals, and some people work better in mornings, some people work better at night. Everyone has these different ways that their bodies react and behave,
Yeah.
and the
And that,
influences they need.
yeah, and also different ways of putting what they're doing into motion. Not everybody can do all of the things. And that's okay. I think giving people permission to say, no, it's okay. You don't have to be this generalist. You don't have to be good on video and on audio and be able to write and all the rest of it. If it's, do what makes you feel good and do what lights you up, because that's when you're more expressive. That's when you're your most creative. That's when you are your most natural.
And I think I was reading on your website, you said something about how the businesses have this way to heal, and I think I love that, because it's if business is created in the right way, it just has this immense power, doesn't it, just to
Mhm.
touch everything that it touches,
Mm.
whether that's the person who's created it and helping them feel more whole and healed, but also the communities, the people that they serve, and then of
Yeah.
course the environment as well, and nature.
Yeah. Yes, it has a huge healing potential because it's actually also our greatest scar. It's our greatest wound. It's probably not a scar; it hasn't had a chance to heal yet. But it is our greatest collective wound. It's the thing that we chose this economic path. We chose to structure it. We chose to sort of like regiment it, if you like, and then that's the thing that reverses it. When you start to reverse that direction of travel, when you start to reverse the expectations of business, and you sort of say, actually, I hold you to a higher standard. I'm going to hold myself to a higher standard in my business, and then my customers and clients will say, I hold you to a higher standard. If you aren't doing this, then you're not good enough for me. And once you start to do that, then you go through the small and the medium-sized businesses, and ultimately the big businesses have to go, oh, hang on a second,
We have
we've
to,
missed a trick
yeah,
here.
yeah,
And
yeah.
that's just the way it's going to go, because those big businesses are set up on models which they can't change, and they will probably When, I don't know, but they will probably collapse because ultimately alternative solutions will come through.
Yeah. I must admit, I just got goosebumps like listening to you talking then. I think because it's such a big thing for me for this podcast is to give people hope and inspiration. And when you were talking about the wound, and that's our key to healing as well, is like, the businesses have been part of the problem, but they can be the solution.
Yeah.
And I think that's just that's just a really powerful concept, and I think it's a really important thing for people to start realizing, is they're maybe not the enemy, they could be the solution. And if they're if we approach it in the right way, and we find people like you that are, we share this wisdom. And I think, I mean, another thing that I often come back to is trying to be less judgmental as well,
Yeah.
so that you allow people the space to change, because we've all done the best we can up until this point, haven't we? And yes, some of us have perhaps done things differently to others, and perceived better than others, but everyone has the opportunity to change and move forward. And I think judgment restricts that sometimes.
Yeah. And there needs to be that gap between, well, this needs to change, and giving people a pause to actually consider how. It's no good just sort of like, right, now, 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 now. And that certainly, I don't know, I get that with the petition sites. You just get this constant, like, it has to happen, it has to happen now. It's just like, well, actually, yes, you need to express something here, and you would say, we expect a change. Actually, there is a weight of opinion that it says there is a change needed. Not government levels of procrastination, which are extraordinary, but there still needs to be space for the average person to say, how can I shift that? How can I make that work? And how can I sort of gradually change myself? Because it is a gradual thing.
Yeah.
Nobody, as you said earlier, big changes, not necessarily helpful. We want to make the changes in a way that allows us to adapt naturally. And then they become embedded, and then they become consistent.
Well, I mean, if we look, relate that back to ecosystems as well, and part of the issue with the climate changes that we've got is that it is such a big change that it's creating this shock impact on the biodiversity, wildlife, plant life, that can't adapt, it can't change. And so we need to learn from that wisdom as well, don't we? Of like, yes, we need to do it in a way that we can adapt, and we can make the changes, and we can move forward.
Yes, we need to yes, do it in a way that is sustainable. Come back to that lovely word, but it does need to be sustainable.
Yeah. Oh, well, lovely, Polly. I think we're sort of getting to the point that it seems like a natural place to wrap up. But I don't know if you just have anything else that you sort of feel like you'd like to share, any wisdom on your heart that you perhaps haven't had the opportunity to voice today so far.
It's not that I haven't had the voice I haven't had the opportunity to voice it, get my words out. It's more that I wanted to reinforce it, and that is the hope message, that it's not all doom and gloom, and that we all have the ability to make a real change and a really positive contribution. And if we hold that in our hearts, then we will never feel powerless again.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Well, thank you, Polly. I will include the details of your website for people that want to get in touch with you, reach out, maybe find a bit more about what you do. But do you want to just quickly share a little bit about the ways that perhaps people could work with you if they felt inclined or drawn to you?
Well, anybody who's an entrepreneur or has their own business, and it doesn't need to be an online business, it can be a bricks and mortar as well, wants to explore how to engage nature in your business, then I have a monthly membership where we follow the seasons and we look at the main themes. And every month we have a core business area of development that we're looking at, and has a task to go and sit with nature and explore with nature an alternative way of approaching that. So that's something that we, and then have a community to go and communicate and converse about that, and just explore the ideas and see what's sparked. So if you were interested in doing that, then that's available on a link through my website.
Oh, perfect, lovely. And I'll put the link to your website in the show notes below, but if you want to just tell everyone what it is
just basically pollyhearsey.co.uk.
Perfect. Oh, well, lovely. Well, thank you again, Polly, for sharing your wisdom and guidance with us today. It's been a fantastic conversation. I've very much enjoyed it, and I just hopefully we can do it again sometime. And
hope so.
I look forward to following more and seeing more of what you do and share.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been an excellent conversation, and I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Polly. Thank you so much for listening to the Nurtured by Nature podcast. I truly hope this conversation has brought some hope and inspiration into your life. I would love to have these messages ripple out across the world. So if you can, please share this episode with your friends, leave a review on your favourite podcast player, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. I would love to hear from you, so please feel free to connect with me on the links provided in the podcast description. But most importantly, thank you so much for being a part of this journey with me. But don't forget to simply get out there and enjoy the natural world.